Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Andrea Wilson Woods about responding to adversity in our personal lives and how leaders can be more supportive of their people in the workplace. Andrea Wilson Woods, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have the chance to chat with you. You have such an interesting story and background, and we're going to get a chance to talk a little bit about a recent book of yours, but really have a robust discussion around resilience and how individuals can overcome personal obstacles in their lives. So both at home, but also in the workplace, because at work, we also experience a lot of setbacks. We experience a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities for growth, depending on how we frame those experiences. So as we get into the discussion today, I'm excited for the listeners to learn more about you and to have the chance to really think about their own response to adversity and the difficulties of life, and perhaps how they could be more supporting and empowering leaders in the workplace to help their people who are also dealing with those types of challenges. As we dive on in today, I want to share Andrea's bio with everyone. Andrea Wilson Woods is a writer who loves to tell stories and a patient advocate who founded the nonprofit Blue Fairy. Andrea is the CEO and co-founder of Cancer University, a for-profit social benefit digital health company. With Cancer U, Andrea synergizes her talents of coaching, writing, teaching, and advocacy. For over 10 years, Andrea worked in the education field as a teacher and professional for public and private schools, as well as universities. Andrea obtained her master's degree in professional writing from the University of Southern California. Her nonfiction writing has won national awards. Her new book, a medical memoir titled Better Off Bald, A Life in 147 Days, is a number one bestseller on Amazon in multiple categories. So again, thank you so much for joining me today. And before we launch into the discussion, anything else you would like to share generally with the listeners?
No, sounds great. Let's do it, John.
Okay, wonderful. So I hope that we get a chance to really dive in and talk more about Cancer University and the work that you're doing there. I love social benefit, social enterprise, social impact related organizations. And I know you're doing a lot of great work there. Before we dive into that though, if perhaps you could share with us a little bit about your recent book, Better Off Bald, because I think it tells a powerful story.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So Better Off Bald comes from the story of raising my sister. I was 22 years old. I was living in Los Angeles and I had graduated from USC, and I ended up getting custody of my then 8-year-old sister, Adrian. And I was her legal guardian. I was her only parent. We have the same mother, but her father died before she was born in a car accident, so she never knew him. And I raised Adrian all through my 20s. There's a 14-year age gap there. And 1 month after her 15th birthday, just as she was finishing her freshman year of high school, she was diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer. And it really just, it came out of nowhere. Like the day before she felt fine, that day she was in pain, and we went to the ER. And first we actually went to her pediatrician, then we went to the ER. And it was an ER doctor who told us the results of a CAT scan that showed tumors in her liver and lungs. And then we were immediately put into an ambulance and sent to Children's Hospital Los Angeles. And that was day one of my sister's very short 147-day cancer journey, hence the subtitle of the book. And it was very brutal. It was very tough, and that was 2001. And my sister died from stage 4 liver cancer.
I'm really sorry to hear that. I can only imagine what that must be like to be put in that kind of a role as parent and guardian at such a young age, and then to deal with such a horrific challenge like that. Dealing with any sort of health issue is always difficult, and cancer is just really horrible. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for the efforts in writing the book, and telling that story. And that feeds into your work that you do with Cancer University. And tell us a little bit more about that and what you're trying to accomplish.
Sure. So Cancer University actually came out of my work with my nonprofit. So after my sister died, about a year and a half later, I started a nonprofit specifically dedicated to the cancer that killed her, to primary liver cancer, which is also known as hepatocellular carcinoma. And I started to see this pattern emerge from that work, in that even when people had the best possible information, and there's a lot of bad information out there, but even when they had great information, 95% of the time they didn't know what to do with it. And my background, when I was raising my sister, I was a teacher. After she died, I went back to school and got my master's in writing, and I became an adjunct professor for an online university. And I'm a certified coach. And so I have been coaching cancer patients and caregivers pro bono for years. And I realized there was this whole coaching and teaching component that needed to happen, and doctors just don't have the time to do it. But I didn't want to charge anyone. And I was actually getting recruited on LinkedIn by other companies asking me to come work for them to be a cancer coach. And I just didn't feel good about that. But I knew it was needed. There was no question. Like it's a missing component. And so I really started thinking about, well, how can this problem be solved? It's obviously not being solved by all of the charities out there, including mine. And that's when I came up with the idea for Cancer University. And I actually entered an international entrepreneurial competition. On the concept alone, I had absolutely nothing but a web page that I threw together. And there's a lot you can do when you teach yourself. And I did very well in the competition. And that gave me the momentum to move forward and further vet the idea. And so that's what Cancer U is. It's a online membership platform for cancer patients and caregivers to really educate and empower them to become advocates for their cancer care, to improve outcomes for the patients, but also reduce overall costs. So the end users of our platform are patients and caregivers, but our actual customers are payers and providers and pharmaceutical companies. So we never want patients and caregivers to have to pay for their memberships.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about the competition? I'm really curious about that, and I think that's so cool that the idea alone was so good and so needed, so impactful, that you were able to be recognized and really use that as a springboard.
Oh, sure. I never know if people want those kind of details. Sure. It's called the Astellas C3 Prize. It's sponsored by the Astellas pharmaceutical company, and it's their annual Changing Cancer Care, hence the C3 competition. And that year it was co-sponsored by Robert Herjavec from Shark Tank. He's very passionate about changing cancer care because his mother died from ovarian cancer. And I literally just like entered it with a web page. My friend had given me the link, and I was like, this is an opportunity to see if this idea has any merit, because it sounded kind of crazy even to me. And it's one thing to have a nonprofit in a very specific, very niched cancer versus a for-profit with a somewhat complex business model trying to address all cancers. And so I really just didn't know. And so I entered the competition, and that year, out of over 160 entries from 21 countries, I got in the top 10, which is the semifinals. And I had to interview with the Estellas executives, and I knew I wasn't going to make the finals because I did just have the concept, but they loved the idea. Like, they were all over it. They got it. They could see what I was trying to do with it. And that's when I knew. I was like, okay, I need to move forward with this. And so I still spent 6 months vetting the idea. I spoke to every patient, every advocate, every caregiver, every provider, every farmer person, like all the relationships I had been making over 15 years. I spoke to all of those people and asked, is this really needed? What do you think? And if one person had said no, I'm not sure I would have moved forward, because I knew it was going to be incredibly difficult. But every single person said yes. So the following year, that was now 2 years ago, I decided to move forward. I didn't want to do it by myself, and so I did find a co-founder who had a very different skill set than I do, which I highly recommend. You don't want people who are like you want people who are different. And then we moved forward.
Well, that alone is a really interesting story, and perhaps on another day we can dive on into more of the particulars about the co-founding process and how you built this
Yeah.
thing up that is so needed and so important. But I appreciate you giving us a little teaser of that, because that alone is really interesting, even though I know that's not the main focus of what we're really discussing today. Um, so I'm terminal illness of any sort is just so difficult, and people want to know how to comfort and how to respond in a constructive, positive way. But I don't think we usually know how to do that. It could be because we feel so uncomfortable and worried about putting our foot in our mouth, saying the wrong thing, inadvertently hurting the person that we're trying to comfort. And so I think a lot of times people end up not stepping forward, not saying something, or they end up just kind of giving platitudes that probably don't really help, and don't really resonate with the person or really provide that kind of support. So you've done so much work in the area specifically of cancer, um, in your advocacy work, in your coaching, and working with individuals who are struggling or trying to figure out how to better support loved ones who are struggling. Any insights on how we can approach those difficult conversations to provide that kind of emotional support, the social support, all those elements that people need so much in that time of struggle?
Yeah, I would start by saying that a lot of people just don't know they're terminal, right? Even their doctors don't use that word. The words palliative care never came up with my sister. Like, no one explained that to me, even though I thought I asked very good questions. I never understood that the chemotherapy she was taking was totally useless and a waste of time. I didn't get that. So there's that, and that's a whole nother probably podcast. But I would say in general, I kind of have two rules of thumb. If you're the person on the outside, um, you know, you don't want to, like you said, put your foot in your mouth. And the best thing you can say is, "I'm sorry, and how can I help you?" And if you say, "How can I help you," though, you need to be open to whatever that response is. Don't ask how you can help and then not be willing to step up, no matter how odd or bizarre the request may be. Um, but anything really beyond "I'm sorry," you're likely to hurt the person in some way, and especially if it's a parent and their child is sick. It does not make the parent feel better, you know, that, I think my all-time favorite during that time when my sister was sick was "God only gives you what you can handle." And it was like, oh, come on, really? Because so my sister's a strong person, I'm strong, and then so she gets a, terminal cancer, really? So, never spoke to that friend again. She never called me again. I mean, but she didn't know what to say. And that was really horrible. But anyway, but I digress. But I coach patients and caregivers, though. People will ask how they can help. So it's up to them to be very specific. Like, where do you need help? Don't be afraid to ask for whatever it is you need. And one extremely bizarre request was, my sister got all these wigs and she really loved them, and they were like different colors and stuff, but she wanted to take good care of them. So she wanted those styrofoam wig heads, and she wanted to display them in her room. And there was only one place I knew that had those where you could just walk in and buy them. And this was when we lived in LA, and I mean, just to go 2 miles could take 20 minutes. But a friend said, "How can I help you?" And I knew she lived 5 minutes away from this store. And I said, "This is gonna sound a little crazy, but I need you to buy me 4 styrofoam wickets." It was like 12 bucks, but she lived right there. And she kinda laughed, was like, "All right, if that's all you need." And she did, but then she brought them to us, which was a good, like, 20, 30-minute drive for her, and then she went home. And that's what we needed. So, again, it's like, ask that person what they need. I had a friend, very well intentioned, who lived out of the country at the time, and he kept trying to send us meals. But the delivery service who was trying to send them to us never knew when we were home. I mean, at any given time, we could have been at the hospital, and it just never worked. But he never asked us what we needed. I would have said, I never would have said, deliver some meal, because you just never knew when we would be there. And again, well intentioned, but we never got that meal.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great advice. And you highlight something that's really important in any sort of social impact type of work, like you're doing with the Cancer University, or when you're just trying to, on a more micro level, reach out to friends and family and neighbors. Is good intentions don't mean good results. So
Right.
if you want to actually help, you usually have to talk and to the people who need the help. You need to ask the question, and then you need to listen. You need to
Mhm.
set your own kind of bias aside. You need to set your own. Some people come to you, I'm sure they came to you thinking this is how they wanted to help you, and so they tried to kind of push stuff onto you. But you need to stop. You need to listen. You need to ask the question, and then you need to be willing to set your own ego, your own preconceived notions aside, and just do what the person asked.
Yeah.
And that's half the battle if you can just be willing to do that, I think. How about in a workplace setting? So, a lot of the listeners of this podcast are managers, organizational leaders, and health issues do come up in the workplace all the time. In fact, right now we're in the middle of a pandemic, and so
Right.
people are thinking about it constantly. Fortunately, the pandemic hasn't um, ended up having, excuse me, as much of the dire health effects for all of the population that we had initially thought. Certainly, there's a lot of illness, and there's just a horrible number of people suffering and deaths. But in terms of pandemics, the rapid spread and the intensity of the illness hasn't been what people had originally thought it might be. But everyone is trying to keep people healthy in the workplace. Employers are trying to figure out how to support their employees who may be sick, whether it's a pandemic or it's a terminal issue like cancer. And cancer is such a prevalent issue that every leader, I imagine, who oversees any significant number of people, are going to have to deal with how to best be supportive of an employee or the loved one of an employee who
Yep.
is terminal, right? So, do you have any thoughts or suggestions on how you might adapt your advice for a leader in an organizational context, and how they, because it's even trickier, I think, when you're in that kind of a situation, trying to figure out how to be the most supportive of someone who's suffering.
Well, I think one positive thing that's coming out of COVID is that more and more leaders, more bosses, if you will, are realizing that people can work from home and do it really well as long as they have the tools, as long as they have the computer and the internet and everything that they need to do their job. They can do it really well, and they often do it better from home because there aren't the water cooler conversation distractions. So I think that's actually one of the big positives that's come out of all of this. And what I've seen work really well for people I've coached, and just families I know, is that the more flexible the employer has been, the better it's worked. You know, just being flexible, and it's up to that employee, of course, to be in constant communication, but just understand that there's just no, there, just like with COVID, I mean, there's just no rules with cancer. You just don't know when you're going to have a bad day or a bad night, or might suddenly have to, run to the ER, or, you think everything's going well and then everything is upside down for the next 36 hours. You just don't know. And so if an employer can be flexible, then that employee can still be productive and be there. And that employee will be so loyal to
Yeah.
you. So I think also if employers can just play the long game too. I can think of someone right now, an amazing woman whose husband battled liver cancer for 3 years, and she stayed with her job the whole time, but they gave her an enormous amount of flexibility, just an incredible amount of flexibility, which she was so grateful for. And she's still there, and they even gave her that flexibility after he died. They gave her that time, come in when you want to, when you're ready. I think that's really important. I mean, that is the number one word I can think of: flexibility.
Yeah, flexibility in terms of work from home opportunities, flexibility in terms of schedule,
Yeah.
um, just allowing people to, I mean, recognizing the humanity of your
Hmm.
employee and recognizing the difficulty of what they're dealing with, whether it's their own health or the health of a loved one that they're trying to be supportive of. It's so completely disruptive to life.
Yeah.
And they very well may have every intention to continue to just be an amazing top performer in your organization, but there are priorities, and in the short term, like you said, play the long game. In the short
Yeah.
term, there might be a dip in productivity, because I mean, who wouldn't struggle with focus and attention when you have a loved one who's terminal? But in the long run, you engender commitment and loyalty, and they can be quite productive given the flexible arrangements,
Oh,
even
yeah.
even amidst the emotional struggle and turmoil. Something else that I was thinking about as you were talking about the flexibility is just making sure your workplace is a safe place for people to make those kinds of accommodation requests.
Yeah.
Because some workplaces, employees simply don't feel like they can even ask,
That's a good
without
point.
being retaliated against or being seen as not a team player or whatever. But if and you won't know, like if I have an employee that reports to me and they're not sick, but they have a terminal loved one, there's no way that I will know that unless they tell me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And in many workplaces, they wouldn't dare tell anybody because of how that might be viewed. And so just being authentically interested in the well-being generally of your employees will pay big dividends when these types of really more serious types of issues arise.
Yeah.
Um, and I just think this is not even a remotely close equivalent of an example. But people are dealing with COVID right now, and I contracted COVID. I still don't know how, because we've basically been stuck at our house for 6 months.
Oh,
But
God.
but I somehow managed to contract COVID back in June, and it was scary for my wife in particular. Um, for me, health wise, it's like I hit a wall, and it was brutal for a few days, and really I was in bad shape for about a week, but then I was fine. I was a fortunate one, right, where I recovered quickly, and then I
Right.
was able to move on. Um, Other people who are dealing with coronavirus haven't been so lucky. And then, but that's, even you set that aside and you talk about terminal illness, where it's not a like 1 week long difficulty. It's
Right.
something. that it just takes an emotional toll day in, day out, ongoing, and there's really no relief from it. And so, I mean, I just remember in that 1 week how stressed my wife was in trying to help with, take care of the kids while I'm self-isolated in the bedroom and trying to help me and take care of me, and just worried about my health. And, that like magnify that a million times. And that's what you're talking about when someone's dealing with someone battling with terminal cancer. And so the emotional toll, the anxiety, the stress, all of that is what employers really need to be aware of, to provide the necessary supports so that their people can take the time they need to focus on them, their family, and then return and be more productive, more committed, more loyal of employees after they've gone through this crisis.
Yeah. Yeah. Just be flexible, The employer needs to be flexible, but the employee needs to communicate as well. So
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. We could go on and on, and I think there were several tangents we could have gone down that we didn't have time to today, so maybe we could do that another time. But before we close today, I want to give you a chance to share with listeners where they can find your book, how they can find out more about Cancer University, and find out more about the work you're doing and connect with you professionally.
Okay. I do have one story if we have time, though,
Oh,
that I
sure,
think
sure.
your listeners would appreciate. So you said a lot of your listeners, it's about workplace and resilience and things like that, correct? So I got fired from what I thought was my dream job. And this has been 6 years ago now, but I was still living in Los Angeles, and this was a job that I truly manifested. I wrote down every single thing I thought I wanted in a job, and very specific things. I don't want to commute more than X amount of time. I want to work 2 days from home. I want to do da 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 da. I want this much in salary. Da 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 da. So I was very intentional about this. And I wrote this very detailed bullet pointed list in September. I got a first interview in October because this was a somewhat large nonprofit, not mine, a different one. The interview process was long. So I had another interview in November, another one in December, last one in January, started in February. After a excellent 90-day review and 10% raise, I was fired on my 100th day. And it was like I called the bitch slap from the universe because I was like, what just happened? Like, I couldn't believe what happened. I'd never been fired before. And I just want to tell people that it's not the worst thing that will ever happen to you. I promise. Because once I got over my shock of being fired, I was like, does this even compare with what I went through with my sister? Does it even come close? And it was like, no, this was just a shock. And clearly I'm not meant to work with this company, because the way they went about firing me was ridiculous. It was horrible. And I just wanted to share that because I think when people get fired, I think we all just take it so personally. And like, what did we do wrong? And oh my goodness. And you know what? It's not always personal. I mean, really, it's just not. Like, that's not the best fit for you. Sorry, there's a bug. There we
Yeah.
go.
Well,
Like, why
no,
is there a
no.
bug in front of me?
I
So yeah,
I
I just,
appreciate that
yeah,
experience, and your thought of how does this compare to what I dealt with my sister. Now, I've never dealt with a family member who had cancer and a terminal disease. Um, Knock on wood, not yet. Um, but I actually tend to frame things that way myself. Like, I just ask myself when I have a career setback, a personal setback, something happens, I'm really frustrated, I'm disappointed. I just ask myself, well, really, what's the worst thing that could happen? How does this compare to that? And it's almost never that horrible. Like, it's a temporary setback. And so
yeah,
we look at what life throws us and we respond, and hopefully we can respond with resilience, and hopefully employers will be better than the one that fired you. It sounds like maybe there's some political stuff going on in the background, and things like that are largely completely out of your control, and so to ruminate on that doesn't help anything. And you pick up the pieces, you move on, you learn what you can learn from it, and then you tackle the next challenge.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, and if that hadn't happened, I would not have ended up moving away from Los Angeles. Like so many other things in my life wouldn't have happened that all were amazing. So again, you kind of never know how things are going to work out. So yeah, I just wanted to share that given your audience. But in terms of where they can find me, best place to find the book is betteroffbald.com. Also, all my social media is there as well. To learn more about my nonprofit, it's bluefairy.org, FAERY.org, Blue Fairy, and you'll find out why we're called Blue Fairy. And for your listeners, I have a special gift if they go to cancer.university, so no .com or .org, just cancer.university. We're going to offer them a free lifetime membership to Cancer U. So if you're a newly diagnosed cancer patient or the loved one of a newly diagnosed cancer patient, go to cancer.university, click apply now or learn more, and fill out the application. And then when you get to the bottom, you just click I have a coupon code, and the coupon code is HCI podcast, all caps, all one word, and the fee will be waived, and you'll have a free membership.
Wonderful. Well, that's very generous of you. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me. I hope we can continue the discussion and do this again soon. I hope my listeners will reach out and get connected with you. Go check out Cancer University. Take advantage of this tremendously generous offer. And I hope everyone will stay healthy and safe, that you can be supportive of those around you, and that you can all find passion and joy in your work each and every day. Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.